Hi, I'm Chris. This is Finding God at Work. Just a reminder that Finding God at Work isn't just a podcast, it's also an online course. Check it out at findinggodatwork.org. Our current series is Meaningful Work, Calling, Formation, Service, and Love. Today in the liturgical calendar, it's Maundy Thursday, which is the day when Christians commemorate Jesus' last meal with his disciples, after which he was arrested, and then moving forward into Friday, his crucifixion. And so I wanted to take some time as we're looking at what does it mean to love our teammates at work, to look at how we love people through pain. When we're experiencing pain and suffering in our personal lives, that definitely affects our energy in the workplace. Or when we're facing pain at work, obviously that's right there in front of us. And how we choose to respond when we face pain makes a world of difference to the people around us. And Jesus is our example here. So as I was thinking about this, I was reflecting back to an earlier season of life that me and Katie were in. We had been married for about 3 years, and we ended up in the emergency room at Rush downtown, and just some weird symptoms, some pain that Katie was experiencing. We didn't know what was going on. Turned into a really long night. And that night was kind of the first night of 3 straight years of health crisis for Katie. And, you know, the details are more her to share than mine. But we faced one thing after the other. Mental health stuff, physical health stuff, stuff related to earlier stuff she had experienced in childhood, stuff that was new. We joked at some point that she should just get a t-shirt that says comorbidity, which is the technical term when you have a lot of different things going on at the same time. And for me, we were very young. We were still in our early 20s. I was just totally unprepared for this. I did not expect to be in this kind of caregiver role for Katie so early in our marriage. There was this kind of fog of confusion that rolled in. It was really hard for me to pray. It was hard for me to have energy for things like work. Sometimes I would just find myself sitting and staring for a while and then kind of have to come back to the moment. And that painful moment in our story became a really spiritually formative time for me, as I learned, rather than running away from the pain, that I could actually face into it. I think that's the challenge for us whenever we're in a season of life like that, is not to run away from the pain, but to face into it. And on Maundy Thursday, we have the example of Jesus, who can show us how he faced into the pain. And so I want to look at some of the Gospel of Luke and its description of this day in Jesus' life. And I think we see kind of 4 aspects of how he faced into suffering. And I've phrased them as kind of I statements. This was Jesus' attitude. I'm ready for this. I don't have to fight this. I can love others in the middle of this. And there's something better on the other side of this. Okay, so first, I'm ready for this. As Jesus and his disciples are sitting down at the table for what Jesus knows is the last supper he will have with them before his death, he says, I have eagerly desired to eat this Passover with you before I suffer. Jesus knows exactly what's coming. He's ready. He prepares for it. He doesn't run away or avoid the suffering. He's ready for it. Okay, second thing, I don't have to fight this. The difference between Jesus' attitude and the disciples' attitude couldn't be more different. They are not ready for Jesus to suffer. And they've resisted the idea of Jesus suffering earlier in his ministry, and then that's also what happens at the moment that Jesus is arrested. So this is Luke chapter 22, verses 49 through 51. When Jesus' followers saw what was going to happen, they said, Lord, should we strike with our swords? And one of them struck the servant of the high priest, cutting off his right ear. But Jesus answered, no more of this. And he touched the man's ear and healed him. if this wasn't such a serious and poignant scene, the disciples' response would be comical. It's so the opposite of what Jesus has been calling them to. They think that violence is the answer here, and some of them think to ask Jesus, but then one of them, who we know from other accounts is Peter, he just goes ahead and tries to kill. When you're swinging a sword at somebody's head, that's a lethal move. This soldier, this servant of the high priest, whose ear gets cut off, and yet Jesus, he stops them. He says, "No more of this." And then he heals this servant. That posture matches his readiness. Instead of feeling like he has to do whatever he can to avoid suffering, even hurting others, he embraces suffering. He goes willingly with those who are arresting him. Okay. So far, Jesus' attitude, I'm ready for this. I don't have to fight this. And third thing, I can love others in the middle of this. And we know from our reflections on love that to love is to seek the good of the other. But that requires paying attention to others, as we looked at in our last episode. And suffering, if you're like me when you're suffering, you can be tempted to just really focus on yourself. The suffering draws you away from looking at others, and you just look at what you're going through. But Jesus, in the midst of his suffering, was able to persist in focusing on others, their needs, their desires. He was present to them in the moment, even while he was going through that pain. And so we see this with three particular cases on this night in Jesus' life. First, the high priest servant, the one who got his ear cut off, right? Jesus does a miracle. This is his final miracle before his death and resurrection, is this miraculous healing of his enemy. Unlike many other miracle stories, there's no description of the high priest putting his faith in Jesus here. Since he's taking part in his arrest, we could probably imagine he probably doesn't believe Jesus is the Messiah. Although I wonder what happened to him after this encounter. But Jesus would have been totally within his rights to oppose this enemy. And yet instead he looks at what he needs. He's like, oh, he just got wounded by my hot-headed Peter. He needs healing. Jesus is still moving for the good of others, even at this moment. It's totally unmerited love for this servant of the high priest. Okay, as the story goes along toward Jesus' crucifixion, there are other people who kind of, like those soldiers, like the servant of the high priest, are opposed to Jesus. And there's this mixed crowd of Jews and Gentiles who begin mocking Jesus in different ways. So Luke writes, this is in the next chapter, 23, starting in verse 35. The people stood watching, and the rulers even sneered at him. The soldiers also came up and mocked him. Now, the typical response that human beings have when they face this kind of abuse from others is to just wilt in the face of it, or to return it in kind, to condemn those who condemn you, to return contempt with contempt, in kind of angry defiance. But Jesus doesn't do either of those things. He doesn't wilt in response to others' hatred, and he doesn't return hatred for hatred. Instead, he takes an interest in what's going on in these people's souls. Again, he's seeking their good. He prays for them. Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing. It's Luke 23:34. In his own pain, Jesus takes time to make excuses for the people who are mocking and murdering him. And then finally, there's the disciple who we've come to know as the thief on the cross. So this is another crucified prisoner right next to Jesus on one of the three crosses there. And he says, Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom. That's Luke 23:42. And Jesus responds, truly I tell you, today you will be with me in paradise. Again, Jesus is mustering the attention and the energy needed to love even at his lowest point. And the historical research about crucifixion has shown it was very difficult to speak while you were crucified. It would require pushing yourself up painfully on your nailed feet in order to speak. So Jesus actually embraces that a little bit more suffering in order to respond to the faith of this man next to him, in order to reassure him that his faith is well placed, that he will be with Jesus in paradise. So we see these three different cases: the high priest servant, the soldiers and the mockers, the thief on the cross. Jesus is still focused on loving others in the middle of his suffering. Okay, so those are the three parts so far. Jesus' attitude is, I'm ready for this. I don't have to fight this. I can love others in the middle of this. And then the fourth part, there's something better on the other side of this. Jesus' statement, today you will be with me in paradise, shows that Jesus is still confident in the power of God. Jesus knows that the story is not over on Good Friday, but that God's life will still have the final word, that Resurrection Sunday is coming. He trusts himself, he entrusts himself to God, who he knows will vindicate him. That's really important. Jesus would not be able to have this attitude of readiness, of not having to fight, of loving others, unless he was confident something better is coming. So now let's think about how we can practice this. When you face pain, maybe it's in your personal life and that's sapping your energy in the workplace. Or maybe it's a challenge right there at work. Maybe a work project that's going the wrong way. Maybe a relationship at work that just doesn't have the trust it needs. Maybe a boss or superior who's treating you unfairly. While you're facing that pain, what would it look like to adopt the attitude of, I'm ready for this. I don't have to fight this. I can love others in the middle of this. And there's something better on the other side of this. Take some time this week, meditate on Jesus' life, his death, the hope of his resurrection, and ask him to show you how you can live that out, even in the midst of pain in the workplace. Thank you, Jesus, that you went to the cross for us. Thank you that you draw us into a life like yours, a life of love, even when it hurts. Give us that power beyond normal human attitudes to choose what we didn't choose, to love you and love others, even in the midst of pain. Jesus, do your work in us as we do our work with you. Amen.
Thanks for listening. Finding God at Work is a production of Mission Central, a ministry based in Aurora, Illinois, dedicated to forming Christians for mission in everyday life. You can subscribe to the podcast wherever you listen to this episode to get 10 minutes of teaching on faith and work every Thursday. To get resources to go deeper with each podcast series, read our blog, and get info about upcoming courses on faith in the workplace, go to our website, missioncentral.church.